So we're getting into a section where we are going to have a discussion, but a co-sponsor of this event is the Solidarity Mix. To explain who the Solidarity Mix is, just this summer, Parag, Kanda, Kenny, Paige, yeah, and I, we were just in Parag's kitchen actually, and we're like, oh, this is such a great conversation. We should totally have some type of, podcast, a YouTube thing or whatever. And we did it, we called it one session. It was actually pretty good. We also did poetry, we shared one poem that we enjoyed, and we started just having a conversation around that. So I was thinking this is another one of those situations, I guess, where we just shared poetry, we just shared, we had some exchanges around the Vietnam War, post-Vietnam War. So this is also a good opportunity to try to generate some I guess a dialogue around what we just talked about, and especially from the lens of how can it really once again help us take action that is going to build a better world. Yeah.
I want to thank Sister Bayang. Her and Parag have been really good comrades and friends. We've had a couple of conversations that I think are kind of what I call eye to eye, heart to heart. And the kind of conversations I think that can kind of change spaces in the world. And Bayang kind of led us with this idea of let's put it on tape. Me and Parag kind of came along slow but willing, because we're all so busy. We're all what Bayang calls moving the lawyers one way or the other. But we are the Solidarity Mix. And the view of the Solidarity Mix is this, is that we need broad and deep solidarity amongst BIPOC people. And even beyond the BIPOC community, I think we need broad solidarity of folks that share ideas around how do we make the world better, more inclusive, the world in a view that's not only from the view of the wealthy few, but it takes into account many of the folks from lots of our communities that are struggling here in the United States and places where lots of us are from, Africa, Asia, India, all those places where our folks are struggling a day on life. We had a really wonderful program here today, the Sound of Noise that Bayang organized and led with some wonderful, amazing poets that are still in the audience, hiding a little bit because they're not sure they want to be on our channel, but really provided some really, really thoughtful words around kind of examining the question of what happened during the Vietnam War and where are we 50 years after the Vietnam War? What does it mean? Bayang and I agree on a lot of stuff, and one of the areas where I think we're trying to understand each other a little better is this idea around American involvement in the war, and so I kind of wanted to start with a question, since that's okay. I kind of want to understand better the point that we talked about, this idea of Laos being a small country, of Vietnam being a larger country with a much larger population, a much larger military force. And this idea that you were sharing that sometimes large countries like the U.S. have to get involved and support. I wanted to add some context to that. I asked that question knowing that you and I agree on most things, and I respect you deeply. It's okay if we kind of have to struggle to understand each other better, because I'm going to follow you wherever you go. I'm going to Chicago with you too.
Okay.
For the cooperative piece. But especially in the context of American, its history with its own indigenous population. There's no violence against Native American folks here, slavery, the real kind of violence in our community. And so I'm trying to understand your statement in that context, also understanding that it was a very dialectical and difficult kind of circumstance. You have largely Stalinistic communist movements in the former Indochina, and then you have probably the largest empire the history's ever seen also involved here. So I understand there's some complications, but want to give you a chance to maybe add some texture to that and help me maybe understand better.
Sure. So I'm happy that we're able to open the dialogue. I would say that I think as background information, for example, one of the things that has happened to me as an Asian American is that sometimes I have gone to meetings, whether internationally or even in the US, and then there's an assumption that because I'm involved in very progressive things, that I'm also anti-capitalist or pro-communism or all of those things. So, for example, one time I was in Nicaragua, and then, people that I was hanging out with from Nicaragua, and Nicaragua is more, socialist, left-leaning state, of course. And they're like, oh yeah, you're Asian, Ho Chi Minh, Mao Zedong, we love you guys, and all of those things. And I'm like, I'm actually, in the US because my family was, not aligned with Mao Zedong, and they were not aligned with Ho Chi Minh, right? So, but, and then sometimes I think in progressive spaces in the US, it's kind of the same thing, which is that there's such an anti-capitalist, positioning that I'm all for, equality and everything, but because of the experience of my family with communism in Laos, it's very difficult for me to say, I support communist, principles or things like that. And in my self-education, I guess I'm better understanding now that the reality of it is that a lot of the countries that have tried to implement communism right now have done it in ways that were not maybe very close to what maybe Marx was talking about, right? I mean, even Russia, I guess, was not really able to implement things because you had other political figures interpreting the words. And so Marx, for example, from what I understand, was really talking about giving power to the people. But for some reason, other communists took the people to mean the state. And now instead of having like real people power, you actually have authoritarian communist powers that are like replicating, never having real elections and staying there forever, having oligarchies that are making tons of money. And what has really changed is just that the names and the faces have changed, but you still have like elite classes, even in communist countries. So I think that I want to have that kind of conversation because I think that we're all looking for something better than what is existing right now. Yeah. But maybe even communism is past whatever, right? Maybe we're looking, and my own perception of the Ukrainian war is that it is an existentialist fight for Russia or the former Soviet Union, because the communist model has not worked. And how can they maintain some power? I mean, no one wants to be like Russia, the former Soviet Union anymore. I think back in the 50s, maybe even back in the 70s, people still thought, wow, the Soviet Union and Russia were a real alternative to the US or to the West or things like that. But nowadays, nobody is like, wow, we want to be like Russia or we want to be like the former Soviet Union, right? So anyway, I'm coming from that perspective. Yeah.
I think I'm going to surprise you. We're going to agree on a lot. I think there's a couple of things. One, I think that, and I kind of hinted at this early on, but the Stalinistic nature of the Soviet Union after Stalin took over in the 1920s. And certainly there was a lot of things good about redefining kind of class structures in China under Mao. That was also really kind of violent, undemocratic, and Stalinistic. And so, and I'm not here today to bang out a position on whether socialism and capitalism is correct. I think that both are in really deformed stages. And I think that you hit the point on the head that we've got to find something better. I would say the African American experience in the Americas, I think, shows us the monopoly, neoliberal capitalism, is making this as violent as the Stalinism that you and your community experienced in Laos. I would say it's, I think the thing that complicates it really a lot for me is that there was kind of French colonial oppression in Indochina, and that even maybe the wrong methods, the folks in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam were fighting to get that yoke off of them. And to me, on the basis of that, that seemed to be fair. It's been a long time since I studied and read that stuff, so I don't want to get, act like I remember the detail of it. It's been about, I guess, about 30 or 40 years since I really studied it. But I think, too, that the world at that particular point, I think our brother poet here kind of pointed out that the energy that the fighting people in the former Indochina gave to the entire world, they were grappling for what is the thing that's get us out underneath European slavery, colonialism, because it was largely European-based colonialism and imperialism that were oppressing most of the planet in ways that most of us would say was unfair. But with that, I think the thing that pops up to me is I don't think we are existing in a place with pure capitalism, because it's, as we look at the planet under neoliberalism, it's more and more concentration of wealth, and the richest people are making all the money. All the regular folks like us are struggling. And so the question becomes, I think, beyond all these isms, and I don't care about how people define. That's why I think you and I are no doubt compatriots and comrades. Like, what do we do to fight structures that oppress folks that look like us, right? One last thing I want to say too is that in the build-up to reading this, man, there's so many examples of Black and Asian. I know using the word Asian is lazy because the Asian community is so diverse, not so like the Black community. But since we're using that in this context, is why I use it. But there are so many non-publicized and non-talked about and non-studied examples of real solidarity amongst our communities that I get a little emotional about it, because the things that we end up hearing about the most are the ways and the spaces where we're dividing. It's almost like those things are what they want us to hear and know about each other. So, we stay separated. And so I was reading some stuff by Grace Lee Boggs last night. I don't remember the name of the organization, but I was reading some of the, I think I'd sent it to you in a text message, some of the very powerful Chinese Americans in the Bay Area that were stalwarts of the civil rights movement, held the line around police misconduct, shoulder to shoulder and arm to arm with Black and Latino folks in the Bay Area, and all these other things that these young people are doing. And so, I don't know, I think the thing that I'm looking to is how do we talk about breaking down structures without having to pick a side, like communism or socialism or neoliberalism, but how do we also still find ways to deal with structures that continue to kind of keep our people in kind of abject poverty? I'll end with this, and I just, and this, dear sister, when I just left Togo, and I know you were traveling too with your family and stuff overseas, but I was just, I was heartbroken first by how similar I looked to the Togolese people. I was blinking my eyes, and I was like, the same kind of stuff I see in the streets of DC or when I was living in Brooklyn. The looks and the body types of things were so similar. But also struck by this idea of like, not unlike South America and Asia, some of the most resource-rich places on the planet facing some of the most abject poverty on the world, and that just can't be right. And so I'm struggling with this whole idea about what do we do to improve it. I'm kind of in the space of cooperative economics and other things. I'm trying to stay away from these real rigid kind of, analysis around communism, capitalism. What do we do to make it so, like Dr. King said, that we can be silly enough to believe that people can have potable water, 2 clean meals, and light? I don't know, what do you think we do?
Yes. So I think I'll go back a little bit to the past and then come back to the present. So one thing that I also wanted to clarify, which I've talked a lot to people because I've been thinking about it, which is that. So I think one of the struggles that I have had with discussions about the Vietnam War is that there has been that kind of equating the communist struggle with the fight for independence. And I I do understand that some of it started from, I guess the at the time I think it was the back in the 50s, wanting to not be under French rule anymore. But I think, and because of that struggle, actually, it did force the French to rethink. We're not going to be able to stay here anymore. We have to kind of restructure how we, how we may stay here, right? The alliances and everything. And my paternal grandfather was actually one of the people that the French went to talk to because they had to find allies. And for my grandfather, when he made the decision to work with the French, in his journals and in his letters, he was very clear that the French came to him and said, we want your help. We want to fight against the Vietnamese communists, and we understand that it's time to give independence to Indochina, right? So we promise you that if you help us, we will give independence to Laos. And for my grandfather, he said that's great, because what will happen, and he was very involved in Laotian politics. He actually was one of the first people who really got involved in the Lao government, and he totally believed that the better future of the Hmong people was to integrate within, because Hmong people were minorities, and they lived in remote hills. They were really looked down, by the majority Lao ethnic group, and for them. So it's been interesting because for my grandfather to be reformed, to be, I guess, involved with the French, it enabled him to actually show the value of Hmong people, and he started getting the ear of the King of Laos, who gave him a title. He became Panya to be reformed. One of the first and few Hmong people that actually got some kind of official recognition from the Lao King, because of all the work that he was doing with the French. And then he leveraged that to really gain advantages for not only the Hmong minorities, but other minorities as well. At some point, he was serving as, I think he really promoted getting more funding and resources for education in villages. He also got the radio to be translated in different languages so that every population could understand the news from Laos. For my grandfather, he made both the choices that, because he was given the choice by the French to have an independent Hmong kingdom or a country, and he said no, we're too small of a community, and we want to be part of a bigger country, so we want to be part of the Kingdom of Laos, right? So that's one choice that he made. Then the second choice that he made is that when he thought about, because he went to school in Vietnam, so he had friends that were, part of the Vietnamese resistance and all those things. And they also asked him to be on their side, because my grandfather was, I think, well liked by a lot of people. He was very diplomatic, and I think he had a lot of various different skills. So he was courted by both sides to be on their side. But when he really thought about it, he made the conscious choice that between being on the communist side, on the capitalist side, then he felt like there would be more chances, right, on the capitalist side. So he made the choice that he was not going to be with his Vietnamese friends, and he was going to be with the French. So I guess I just want to make it clear that there was a conscious decision by people to decide which side to be on. Mm-hmm. And it was not just about, we have always been colonized and we're just going to follow our former colonizers. So that's one thing.
I have a point to make on that.
Okay.
I'm going to take a breath, but I just want to save that space.
Okay. And so I think so. The original question was
moving forward. How do we create space?
Yeah. So moving forward,
you want to talk about the history some more, so we can do that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I think I'm kind of taking the the example of my grandfather, right? Who basically what my grandfather was advocating is that there is strength in number and there is strength in collaboration, right? So for him, he was really looking at who is giving us the best vision of the future, who is really going to integrate us, who is really going to give us opportunities. And between the two, he made the choice. And then once he got into those positions, he really used his position to like have people keep their words, right? And give the resources and the opportunities for his people. So Hmong people are minorities in a lot of different countries in Southeast Asia and even China. But Laos was the first country where Hmong people actually were able to be at high level positions in the government. It's one of the reasons why General Vang Pao arose as, you know, a military leader that was a key supporter and a key player for the CIA, actually, because I guess kind of that understanding that we were such a small people that we needed to be allied, right? And that's the only way that we could really be seen and be heard and be put and be given a place at the table. Hmong people in Thailand, in Vietnam, and even in China took a lot longer. I think it's only now that they may even be at some of the points that we were 50 years ago. So I think it's something to think about in terms of like both the Hmong people who were in Laos at the time, but also I think it's something to be said about Lao people and the Lao government, right? Which is that they were much more open to thinking, oh yeah, this minority group, they have proven themselves to, you know, be somewhat good at something. So we will have them at the table.
Yeah, I want to be real sensitive and careful because I think your family and historical experience is really like super important. I do though. I think to the extent that communism kind of begins to kind of grab a foothold in Indochina, that's at the foot of the French, and it wasn't a benevolent French that came to the Hmong to say that look, we want you to help us fight the communists because they're bad. The French had aggressively and violently oppressed Indochina for a long time, and they were losing the war. And then those of us who kind of study the African diaspora and know the real violence and the oppression of the French in Africa, it becomes hard to think about the French as some kind of benevolent partner. I think, like the Americas, they came to you guys because they needed you. I think the real story to me, I had a father, an infantryman, that died in around Vietnam and Cambodia. He always talks about the bravery of the Hmong and how reliable they were and how honorable they were. And sometimes to me, it's heartbreaking to have both, like, you know, like, I remember my father got really angry at me at the time. That's how he kind of developing politically. So I think he tended to politically believe that America was doing the right thing there. And I was about my second or third year at Howard. I don't think that we were right to be there. I think that question is still correct, or that answer is still correct. I think the real analytical kind of insight into that is the treatment of the non-Black support treatment, in my view, of the American people of the Hmong now. How late and how long it took for the American government to get policies and programs to protect and defend and get the Hmong out. I'm not sure if it wasn't for SNCC and other groups saying, protect the Hmong, and indicate kind of intertwined some of the civil rights stuff that would ever happen. And so, I don't know, I think that piece and part of history, I'm not sure what I am in terms of like qualifying or quantifying what I believe in terms of an economic system. I do know that what we're living in now is not sustainable for the environment. I look at how empty my country is in terms of the soul of America. I look at these mass shootings, and they're like normalized now. And I'm like, what kind of space and place I live in? And maybe for me, like how you had a really personal experience, I have a very personal, bloody African American experience here in the Americas that gives me a very conflicted view of the country. I love it in one sense because I love the people, like the Black communities that beat in my heart. Anytime I leave or go, and then I start meeting people like you, people of color that are activists, and the folks that I've been talking about that share ideas, y'all are also the beat in my heart. But I do know there are some real issues that we continue to ignore, put our heads in the sands around. We don't deal with them soon. I'm not sure what kind of place we need for our nieces, our nephews, and our children. And I, for one, believe that if you look at the way the American consumer consumes resources, includes the environment, whatever you believe in. If you look at the way that, again, like very resource-rich continents are having their resources kind of, the raw resources pulled out of their countries, but come back to their continents and countries as finished goods at much higher prices. That, for me, that's just not fair. That's what they're calling capitalism now. I know it's not real capitalism. It's neoliberalism that Reagan gave the world. That's run amok. But I at what point did kind of like my point says, at what point did just the army of honest folks, righteous folks, just look and say that the child in Togo, the child in Southeast DC, the child in West Chicago, the child in the West Bank is just because of accident of birth, they deserve to eat, avoid violence, those kinds of things. So that's really the things I want to focus on, because I know there's solidarity amongst Black and Asian people and Latin folks, but they just don't talk about it. I know there is, and we've done it, historically done it, but what do we do? What do we do now, right? We all have got scars and pains from the past. I think those things are instructive, but what do we do now to make the world kind of inclusive and loving, and a reflection of just not the most wealthy, but for the Hmong children that are in projects in Minnesota or San Diego. One aside, one of the, I never told you this, probably one of the most powerful social action activist events I've ever been involved in was a Minneapolis-based anti-racist campaign with a shock jock in Minneapolis in 1997. I made a horrible joke about a young Hmong girl who was young, pregnant, confused, wanted to left her baby in a trash can. Got to learn and understand the Hmong community for the first time ever. They got to understand the African American community. I also learned in Minneapolis, I didn't know they had a Native American kind of reservation. It was a project in the city. We did most of the meeting at in that space, and I tell you, those brothers, sisters, and family members in that space were as solid as you ever want to see. But it was really, to me, what America looks like. It was Asian, it was Black, it was Latin, it was white, and we called that J radio station order, issued an apology. It was also in the context of the anti-discrimination school, anti-discrimination fight in Minneapolis. But so, I guess the question is, sister, what do we do? Like, what are the building blocks to beyond all our plain and historical kind of baggage? What are the building blocks to making this place more reflective of folks like you and I?
I mean, I think we do have to understand our history and where people are coming from, right? Because the reality of things right now is that Hmong people have kind of the same statistics as Black folks in the US.
Yeah,
we do have our 1%, the same way that, and it's interesting that we are in DC, because DC is supposed to be a Black city, and because of that, you actually have a Black elite, right? There's definitely a Black elite here. You have like pretty wealthy people, very well-educated people in pretty high positions in DC. And yet, you also have that contrast that it may be a Black city, you have a Black elite, but you have tons of, poor Black people as well.
That's right.
So there's still like black capitalism, first of all, and then the other thing is it just the way that it will always be, which is that there will always be poverty, there will always be poor people or things like that. And I think at some level, some people will believe that. More people coming to the US, a lot of them kind of follow the American model, right? So we have a little bit of the same structure, which is that you have the one person that is doing extremely well, that are living very fancy lives. We have the middle class that is kind of doing well, and then we have a whole bunch of people that are really not doing well as well. And most of our people have also no education, they don't own anything, lots of crimes, lots of drugs, and all of these things, right? So I think that when it comes to thinking about, and somebody said that, I can't remember who said that, it's like you cannot, as a society, you cannot look at who's doing well. You have to look at who's doing badly, and think about so what do you need for the people who have the less means and skills or whatever to actually do well. And I don't know that the US is ready to have that conversation because of that American dream thing, right? The American dream thing, which is really based on the 1% and the 99% thinking maybe we have a chance to be that 1%. And because we know the 1%, then it shows that anybody can do it. And then you have a blame around people who can't make it. It's because we just didn't try hard enough. Everybody had an equal chance at the beginning, and only one person made it. So, but
where was this equal chance?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe equal chance of I guess going to school or whatever. But I think that there are all those different things that we have to kind of be aware of as what is. And I think it goes back to what does it mean to be American, right? I think for newcomers, for refugees, for immigrants, there's a certain image of what does it mean to be American. So you have both the problem of wanting to become American or having to become American because you're here, and then I think there's a reality that the American system is not set up to reward. I guess people who are poor, who are not, social climbing or whatever, right? So.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and answer my own question. And again, I don't have any. I read and draw my ideas from lots of different sources. If someone asked me what I really believe, I'd say Thomas Sankar's 1984 speech to the UN changed my life. I'd say the life of Ella Baker, for me, as an organizer and a leader in the Black community, and what she did for SNCC and the Civil Rights Movement is a model for how I'd like to organize. I think the converging ideas in life of Dr. King and Malcolm X for me were amazing. I think the spiritual work of Khalil Gibran speaks to my heart as much as anything. The Prophet. I think the United Democratic Front out of South Africa, right before Mandela and the group got out, was in my lifetime as good a thing as I saw in terms of United Front work. And so I'm giving broad examples of stuff because I don't want anyone to think that I'm kind of positing one kind of political framework. But I will say this: I think that I agree with what Malcolm X said about America, at least for African Americans. I'm suspicious to believe a lot of my indigenous brothers and sisters will think the same, but American democracy has been an American nightmare. I think one thing where you're right is that our country currently doesn't have the capacity to care or think about those that are left behind, those that are injured, those that are the forgotten. And, I think that we've proven that over 500 years, both here in the Americas and other places. And so, but I do have an idea about what can change. And it's not an original idea to me, but I think it may have been Noam Chomsky that talked about this idea when the governed come home to their own power. When we put down our cell phones, our football games. And listen, I'm guilty. I was watching Ohio State football yesterday and wasn't going to be bothered, so I'm not passing judgment. But when those of us that are governed, the regular everyday folks, the same way that they did it in Mississippi during the Civil Rights Movement, the same way communities all over the world have done it when folks get frustrated and tired enough about how they're treated, good people from all over the world and all over communities come together and they demand change. And I think that question is on the border here in America pretty soon. You see rumblings of it here and there. I think during COVID, I know there was some criticism, but I was kind of proud of the young people. I thought that their pushback to the police misconduct and police violence was as broad a rainbow as I'd seen in a long time. I'm not saying that it was perfect. I'm not going to call it Black Lives Matter, but I thought that the kids they were serious. It was multicultural. It seemed to be based in kind of real concern for class differences. And so I think that that's why I'm coming to every conversation you invite me to, that we've got to have or replicate these kind of conversations millions of times all over the country. And so there's a bunch of us in the streets. And, some political person used to say real politics starts when there's millions of people in the streets and all their weapons and institution things. Once we get frustrated and tired of our children getting miseducated, tired of the environment, making children in other places not being able to breathe, we'll be able to change and decide kind of what we want. And so what I'm calling for is in the short term is all these kinds of conversations like we're having in the solidarity mix. Let's get to know each other, love each other, respect each other cross-culturally. I mean, I learned so much from my Asian compatriots here today. One of the audience members has a question. I think is that
a comment?
Is that a comment?
No, I have a question.
Should I pass the mic, sister?
Yes.
Yes.
And do you want to be?
I love the comments. Yes.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
So I guess I'm listening to both of you all, and I won't say that I'm hearing the same kind of flawed approach that I hear a lot, and
Okay.
I have the same flawed approach.
Okay.
But I guess my question is getting down to what you're saying, because you had a good question. You had a great question. What's one thing in the United States of America you think that the population can change and it will be revolutionary in terms of changing society? One thing, just one thing.
Thank you for bringing me back home to like the real question, brother.
You right at it.
Appreciate you, I love you. I'm not sure I have the answer. I think I do. I think modeling the Mondrian cooperatives in Spain for the Black communities of color. This idea, just think of this idea if we built a cooperative amongst folks of color based on one person, one vote, balanced and equal distribution of the wealth. And the Mondrian is the model, right? And we don't need any rich people. People always say, what are the athletes doing? What are the entertainers doing? And I love them and they've earned their way. But just regular everyday people decided that we were going to build a workers' people's cooperative, an economic machine that served our interests. I think that would be one way to start.
I will go a little bit further because as it happens, I think a lot of people are looking at cooperatives, and I myself is someone who went back to the practice of law, and I decided the coolest area of law to practice right now would be cooperative law. And a lot of it is because as a former Minnesotan, I still consider myself Minnesotan. I will always feel a part of myself being Minnesotan. I was really shocked and saddened by what happened to George Floyd, and especially struck by the fact that it all started with a $20 bill. And I was thinking, it's crazy that all that violence happened because of $20, right? And once again, it underscores how in the US it's all about money, right? But at the same time, it also shows that there really needs to be wealth building, and cooperative law and cooperatives, I guess, for me right now, are a way that you can really have ownership, have real ownership, not have like the government own it or have like corporation own it, but have regular folks coming together into small little enterprises or small little community projects, and then owning and then governing. But my step further is that as I've been doing this work, and today I have Teresa, for example, both of us are working with our housing cooperative. So I should say that one thing that I'm finding out is that not only attorneys, but also I think advocates, community activists are all excited about putting together a project like, wow, it's so cool to like beat the system, raise all the money for it, buy the building, or, start the thing. But once it's there, it's like, who's there to make it work, on a day-to-day basis? And right now, Jason and I are working on, so what happens to, you really have to like, you gave the enterprise or the housing or whatever to the people, but unless you also give them the resources to like educate themselves, gain the skills, and be able to actually manage it and make it like work, and either be profitable or at least be maintained or things like that, then it's not going to be sustainable. And the struggle that we're having now is that most of the resources and the attention of a system is on, oh yeah, cooperatives are so cool and we're going to start them up, and there's like startup funding and everything, but there's no real funding for technical assistance, for ongoing growth for at least the beginning years. And then you have the same way that in the nonprofit, you have like a whole system set up for like supposedly trying to help, people who are under or whatever. But that system is mostly helping itself. And so it still doesn't get down to like the common folks, right? So we have to really think about how do we really empower the common folks? It's like, if there's nobody else holding their hands, who's going to be there, right?
After that, I want to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not in the housing cooperative anymore, but because after 10 years, 2 of which were COVID, but once you do it, this was a public-private partnership. This was a design to fail deal, council members slush fund. And I just happened to move in, and it's like, how are you black folks still in this, and brown folks still in this building in the middle of this Columbia Heights, and this beautiful, what's going on? And people were running around saying, we're supposed to own, we were supposed to own this, and and they knew something, but as it turns out, it's what's called a limited equity cooperative. And that tells you right there, limited equity. Okay, so they're not going to give you anything you can build some wealth on, even though the building is worth quite a bit of money. But what I wanted to say about all that, about the attitude. Now, imagine attempting to infuse folks, for lack of a better word, with a cooperative spirit that you own this now.
Right.
Who never in their life had any model about owning anything. This is asset management. This is law, banking, finance, brokerage, physical plant maintenance, all the things that, yeah, just like she said. But the biggest problem is, besides that, is the attitude and what happens with people who don't realize that they have the power. And I would say, Teresa Edmondson would say that the change will come when Americans understand the power of labor. Labor. That is when people get sick and tired, and it started with COVID. People say, hold up, you want me to come in and do what? Risk my life? And finally, people are saying like, oh no. I think that's when things will change in America. People understand the power that they have.
So, Sister Angela, I don't know if you know, but I'm a long-time labor lawyer. So I'm going to talk to Ella Baker at like the I Got the Light of Freedom Ella Baker. So one of the challenges in the models, and I think, Sister, we're going to have a difference of opinion about this around how you approach it. One of the problems in the model, that's why I think we've got to study Madrigal. Madrigal is a special model. They built it not from the top down, but from the bottom up. They started the church. They had a priest in this park near the Pyrenees Mountains that just happened to be a real progressive priest, and they based it out of the funding of the money of the priest. So I think it's going to be hard in the U.S., but the reason I use I Got the Light of Freedom and Ella Baker is that I think we've got to organize, right? That's why I think it's doable. You got to start with these one-on-one conversations with people about, what we're going to build and how you can participate, right? You can't show up one day with a model, this is what we did. They got to be involved in it from the beginning, organized around it. They got to understand it's going to be hard, but also to the point of labor. And this is what I really believe. This is going to be a difficult thing if it gets out publicly, but certainly for the Black church and labor, we got to call the question on it. And the question is this: Black church, give us money to build a cooperative, right? Labor, fund us. Organized labor, fund us, right? It's true. You and Diane are right. It's really hard to beg out kind of the right resources without relying on some form of institution, right? And labor owes us, right? Mayor governor owes us, that's another question. But also the Black church is one of the most unique institutions that we've built in this country. Black folks give the Black church so much. And listen, I want to be clear. I don't want to get into faith and belief, but I will say this. The Black church has a lot to do with my development, regardless of my frustration about some of the politics that come out of there. I mean, they sent me, I grew up in an African American Episcopal church. And I had 3 siblings and we voted with them. They sent kids to programs all over the country. We close our eyes and vote. We close our eyes and 4 pages had their hands up and sent me all over the country. And so, but we got to call the question of the Black church and labor owes us as well. And so we need to begin to have, I think we've got to construct conversations and plans to bring institutions that we've given a lot to participate, provide institutional support, training, and funding.
Yeah, and I think different people are thinking about how we're going to change things, right? But I think everybody is in little pockets, and so
say that again.
Oh. I think there are little groups in different places trying to make radical change, actually, even in DC. But
she said in little pockets. I'm sorry.
Yes.
She said in little pockets.
That was the part I didn't hear.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's critical, though. That's we need to call national meeting.
Yeah. Because I do see little projects here and there. And once again, DC is such an interesting place because you actually have like a lot of young professionals that are like, liberal and that have both the disposable income and the time to undertake different things, right? And even though they may be, I think there's a lot of activity and activism going on in DC. And they are actually some of them are like doing things like, they're like, can we do this or things like that. And the problem with all of this, of course, is that DC, once again, is that type of city where on the one hand, people are taking risks, but on the other hand, I think the type of professionals that we have are always kind of also thinking, but my real day job or whatever. I think I have to think about my real day job.
That's right.
And stuff like that.
That's right.
So there's a little bit of that division. And then I think there's enough in DC that if people really wanted to bridge that gap between like the people on the ground that really need to build up the capacity, right? And then the people who could build the capacity, then it could be done. But it's just that that gap is not quite bridged yet. But the setting is here, and and so I don't know. I feel like I've been 10 years in DC, and I feel like there's a lot going on. But I also feel like at some level there are a lot of people that are just here for the moment, and then they come to the next, the next level of things like that. So there's a lot of that going on. I think that's what happens with younger people, right? And then that's also what happens with the transiency of DC. But if we could really, I think there are some people that are committed to this though. And I think if we can get to those people that are going to be here for the long term, and we're really building from the ground up, then that would be good. Because an issue that we have in DC, I think a lot of people are kind of used to, it's just the way it's going to be. And even though we have a lot of progressive structure, and it is helping a certain class of people to have jobs, right? But it's continuing. Kind of having that intermediary system where you have all the technical assistance and all the help, but it's not, it's not really changing things for the people that they're helping or things like that. Yeah.
I thank both of you for sharing such interesting perspectives of the American system. Again, from knowing Washington D.C. as you have for the last 10 years, and you have for so long from going to undergraduate school here. I think I share a different understanding or a different complete view from my experiences, from my personal and professional, where we get to go geopolitically, educationally. I spent a lot of time for the last 3 years. I was the CEO of something called the Rebecca Project for Justice, and I had a chance to work with individuals who were forced sterilized, not only in America, but in different countries. And one of the things that was systematic in each country, that in each country across the world that was industrialized, they usually had an educational system that oppressed whoever was the minority, and it didn't and each, whether it was Japan had its own eugenics system, whether it was Denmark had its own, England had its own eugenics program, France had its own, Laos has its own, Kenya has its own, South Africa had apartheid, which came out of the same system. So you have, and this was worldwide. And so we're still dealing with the remnants, and it didn't matter whether it was the Soviet Union, it didn't matter whether it was communism, they still had their own different models of racism with science. And I think looking at that, how scientific racism and economics mixes with each other, I think Brian just wrote a...
So you agree with this, Jeff? You disagree?
Not this.
What you had economics analysis
from your departure point. And I'm about to speak to article that Brian just told me about, but he didn't realize I read it 2 years ago when she originally done the work from a young lady who was talking about Milton Friedman and where he received his understanding of economics from. And, and so Brian wrote this week, if you don't mind me sharing.
Go ahead, CIA, watch it. Definitely want them to hear.
Yeah, so Brian wrote this week an article about Milton Friedman being a eugenicist. And I had actually last October did a conference at the Royal Society of London with what was the original British Eugenics Society. And they had changed their name to the Adelphi Genetics Forum, and basically renounced their work that they had done for so many years, and which is interesting in itself. But what I learned from that particular conference at the Royal Society was how deeply they had understood what is it that we need to do next. And it was interesting being in probably what was one of the most racist organizations in world history. And they'd given a roadmap for what needs to be done. And the first thing they said, well, you need your own science. And in Africa, we had our own science. And they said, and that was that was one of the biggest things. And they talked about in America where children are being hurt and, their understanding of genetics. And so when we hear these plays in politics, whether it's critical race theory or not learning, especially around critical race theory. If we go back and go a little further and go back and look at the historical, political perspective of all these conversations, we'll see a lot of history that just flows all the way through. And so those perspectives of what we get to do next is a personal conversation about
we do next?
how far we get to go.
Jeffrey, what should we do next?
From in Washington, D.C., I think we need to be realistic that most of the people, what you just said, are going to start thinking about their day job in Washington, D.C. as a government town. Mm-hmm. This will, the chances that, and it has a limited government, unless you change personally, from my perspective, unless you change the structure of the government in Washington, D.C., where people have more freedom to make decisions on their own, Washington, D.C. is going to be the hub of most oppression, like it is right now. That's why we have such a glaring disparity between wealth and poverty. And it's meant to be that way. So I don't see any particular movement coming out of Washington, D.C. Some of the individuals may have gone to universities or may have grown up within the area and go other places and create some freedom movement somewhere else. But because of the structure and because of the national government here in Washington, D.C., I don't see that happening. But in other places, I think there's a great opportunity for people to organize around the idea that what we have now is not sustainable. And first of all, it's not sustainable. It's just simply not sustainable. I call Washington, D.C. right now, especially what's going on in educational genocide. And a lot of the other government. That's Friedman. Yeah, Friedman also said that. But also what's being normalized in Washington, D.C. is the fact of genocide. When you look at where the ideas are coming from, where does gentrification come from? Gentrification comes directly from eugenics. When you look at your economic, when you look at the World Bank, where was it created from? It was John Maynard Keynes was a eugenicist. So when you start talking about what are these ideas that everything is revolving around scientific racism and other issues, those things are very important. And then you start talking about the labor movement. I was looking at just this morning, I think they were talking about Chicago Teachers Union. And they said, well, we have to stop school choice because school choice comes from Prince William County, where they were promoting vouchers, which basically, and school choice basically comes out of eugenics also. But I'm thinking, wait a minute, y'all just discovered that. All of these years, that's not really that progressive of a position. Some of us, like myself, have been saying that for years now. And the question is, where do we really get to go politically?
That's a good point. Let's let Brian close on close it down. Thanks, Jeff.
I didn't really have that much to say. I was just going to thought y'all points were very good. I do want to know more about the place you described. If you could provide some.
I'll send you some
like an article.
I got a bunch of
somebody worry about that.
Yeah, Mondragon.
Right.
You haven't heard? It's people talk about.
No, I want to hear about that. And then the other thing is, what you were saying is, DC is a colony, and when you say about genocide and all that, so I think approaches to fixing it are not going to be fixed the way we think. I think y'all saying probably could fix it, probably could have an impact. That's why when SNCC came here, they had the approach to, in fact, they used the word colony. They said this is a colony. But the deal they went in there and got is a bad deal. Everybody knows they don't have fiscal autonomy. Black people, 40% of the town, and they do not have 40% of the wealth. They don't own 40% of the land. So I'm not saying it had to be exactly 40%, but it's so off that's why African Americans basically pushed around in the town. Where there was once 75%, I was here. 75%, and then I pushed around, basically.
Yeah, I was here.
They got pushed around. Once that deal was struck, when they struck that deal, they probably should have walked out. You know what I mean? They probably should have done like they do. And they should have done like, I hate to say it, we were talking about Vietnam, they should have done like them and said, we're going back out the door. You know what I mean? So whatever happens, happens. But we didn't come here to get half freedom, where you give us political rights and that kind of thing. We can vote for people. But then we have no control over anything. So I guess what I'm thinking is, what about, why don't we start looking at our own historical traditions of the cultures that we come from? The answers have to be in there, and I think y'all are saying some of them.
Yeah.
They're not, the answers are not in the West. We know that. That's just a con game. In fact, the word democracy is a con game. That's just a term of art. Like, just our democracy. That don't mean that it makes sense. It just means that's the term for it. You know what I mean? And the same thing with Russia and their history. Now that they sold completely out, there's no option. And we're left with Milton Friedman and all these other people who just say neoliberalism. I mean, it's crazy. And what you said at the start was, I thought you were going to say it, which is, now we have a capitalism that's really eating itself. Communism for, socialism for, right. So you go ahead and throw all your money away, you go bankrupt, you lose it, and then we got you. You know what I mean? But when they was throwing your ass out of your house, you know what I mean? Because you missed like 2 payments. You were like, well, what about me? They were like, what about me? We taking your house, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I mean, I know that's an old trope almost to say that, but it's just true. I mean, it's just true that this thing is just insane at this point. I mean, I'm glad everybody in this room know that, because I don't always talk to people who know that. Most people I talk to, they be talking about, man, I gotta get that paper, man. I gotta get that paper. You know what I mean? I'm at a casino or something like that. I'm like, yeah, right. You're gonna get that paper, all right? It's gonna be like a summons to court for criminal activity. So I'm just saying, I just want to give y'all encouragement that we on the right track, but I think we got to look. The whole world has to look outside the West for the solutions at this point. Bandung, back to Bandung. You remember Bandung conference?
So I think Kenny is a little bit concerned because we were supposed to have an hour, but I think it's fine. It can be edited to an hour. At any rate, what I would say though is that what gives me hope is always networks of good people wanting to do better things. Because for me, going into cooperative law, one of the things that I'm so thankful for is that there's actually a network. And some of them are more or less progressive or whatever, but there's a network. And then you can kind of find people who are alike, right? The same way that in this room, I think we have a lot of people that, we can call upon each other to do things, right? Like doing an event like this or doing something else. And it makes such a difference to be able to find strength in numbers and not only have ideas but actually make them into realities. But to come back to Brian's question is like, what do I really think will make the biggest difference is that people need to have money. And I don't know how it's going to come. Right now.
That's true, though.
Right. Yeah. Right now, the best way. I mean, unless you completely eliminate money, and you go into a cashless society. And I heard that there have been, some types of efforts, but they never go well. But at any rate, so because we're in a society where people need money, then it's access to money. And right now, one of the best models is cooperatives or other types of model where you have to have. I'm almost thinking, Andrew Young. A lot of people were like, I mean, he ended up not being like what we really expected, but he and some of the others that are thinking, the reality of it is that maybe it's true. Everything will not be about jobs anymore, meaning that there may be a time when we don't have enough jobs anymore, right? But we still have to have people being able to make a living. Right. So we have to have a system that is thinking, we don't need people to work to actually produce everything that we need. And therefore, how do you distribute everything, even though people are not working, so that it's not based on having a job, right? The distribution of everything is not based on having a job, but it's also not supposed to be like
careful, sister.
Yeah, so some
socialist.
exactly. Some of you have models that scare people or like haven't worked, right? So we need to find a system that works in some ways. Yeah. Okay.
No, I think I want to let my Asian comrades have the last word. You guys planned this, and I just wanted to tell you again, the poets, especially how enriching your words were, how good they were, and thank you. And I'm Kenneth Page from the Solidarity Mix. I'm going to turn it over to my sister to close it for us.
All right. Before I close, I'll just ask Lori again and Brian, who are in this room. Do you guys want to say something for welcome? Okay.
Too smart.
Yeah. Okay. So to recap, this discussion took place after a remembrance of the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Paris Peace Accords that officially concluded the Vietnam War and the parallel CIA secret war in Laos. We had a gathering today where artists and activists had an opportunity to listen to some poetry that was somewhat related to those topics, and also had the opportunity to engage in discussion. We are concluding with this recording of the discussion. Actually, everything is so complex, and it takes time to be able to look back, to understand what really happened. And then it also takes time to really be able to clearly see the situation we're in. So this is definitely only one more conversation that took place. Hopefully we got a little bit more clarity, a little bit more guidance, a little bit better knowledge of what we shouldn't be doing, and then hopefully a little bit more insights into what else we could be doing. The only thing that we can do at this point, I think, is just keep having those kinds of meetings, keep having those kinds of conversations, and keep having collective action.
Thank you.